They laughed at her old worn boots, unaware she wore them the night she saved the president. A short story, Aishi. The boots had been a joke since November. Mara Voss had worn them to the agency's annual briefing dinner at the Hay Adams, the kind of event where people arrived in oxblood Ferragamos and Manolo kitten heels, where the carpets were thick enough to swallow sound and the wine was never under 200 a bottle. She had walked in from the cold in a pair of dark brown lace-up field boots, the leather creased at the toe box, the left heel slightly worn on the outer edge from 19 years of a particular way of walking. They were clean. They were polished. But they were not by any stretch the footwear of a woman trying to be noticed. She was noticed anyway. Did her Uber drive through a construction site? That was Pierce, from the counter-terrorism desk, whispering it to Delgado just loud enough for the table behind them to catch it. Delgado at least had the decency to cover his mouth. The congressional aide to Pierce's right let out a sharp, silver little laugh before realizing she might be heard. Mara had heard. She always heard. She set her wine glass down, smiled at no one in particular, and helped herself to another roll from the breadbasket. Her partner, Jules, had reached under the table and squeezed her knee. Jules knew better than to say anything comforting. Mara didn't want comfort. She wanted to eat her dinner in peace, deliver her briefing notes to the deputy director, and be home before 11. She had been doing this work for 19 years. She had eaten dinner in worse places, with worse company, in far less pleasant rooms, in boots that were in considerably worse shape than these. The boots, in any case, were not the subject under discussion. She was. She had purchased the boots during her second field deployment, the ones she never talked about. Not because it was classified, though significant portions of it were, but because the memory of it sat in a particular place in her chest, tucked between her ribs on the left side. And she had learned over the years that some things were better left there. Undisturbed, visited only rarely and carefully, and never in public. She had bought a replacement pair twice over the years. The first replacement had developed a seam separation at the left toe after 4 months of regular wear. The second had a sole compound that lost its grip in wet conditions at temperatures below 5 degrees Celsius, which had caused her to slide approximately 3 inches down a rain-slick exterior fire escape in a city she was not permitted to name in any formal document, and which had contributed to a bruise on her left hip that took 6 weeks to fully resolve. She'd gone back to the old ones. The old ones knew the shape of her foot the way a good colleague knows the shape of your thinking, not through any particular effort, but through simple, accumulated time. Her mother had asked about them once, during a Sunday dinner that Mara had managed to attend for the first time in 4 months. Her mother had tilted her head at Mara's feet with that particular expression she reserved for things she found simultaneously incomprehensible and vaguely disappointing. "There are very nice boots at Nordstrom," her mother said. "I saw a pair on sale last week, cognac leather. They were quite lovely." "These are fine," Mara said. "They look like you've been digging." "I have been digging," Mara said. "Metaphorically. Metaphorically." Her mother repeated the word in the tone she usually reserved for words she found insufficient. "There's no reason you can't look professional while digging metaphorically." "Mom," Mara said, "I look perfectly professional." Her mother had sighed and passed the potatoes. The boots remained on Mara's feet. Nobody won that one, and nobody particularly lost it either. 2. The call came on a Tuesday in February at 11:47 p.m. Mara had been awake. She was almost always awake at that hour. Not out of anxiety, but out of a kind of constitutional stubbornness. A conviction that there was always something worth reading, worth reviewing, worth thinking through one more time before the day closed. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and a surveillance analysis file she had already read twice when her secure line buzzed. She noted the time, noted the number, and picked up before the second buzz. It was the deputy director's direct line. "Boss?" His voice was the texture of gravel under ice, controlled, but not quite calm. In 19 years, she had heard that particular quality in his voice, perhaps 4 times. "We have a situation developing at the Meridian. Presidential detail has been compromised. I need you at the staging location in 20 minutes. "Which staging location?" he told her. She was already standing. "Asset confirmation?" she asked, pulling on her jacket one-handed, moving through the dark apartment with the ease of someone who had memorized exactly where everything was and had never rearranged the furniture without a good reason. "That's why we need you. You're the only one in this building who's run a live extraction with the person we're trying to get to. You know the layout, you know the protocols, and you know what he'll do when he's frightened." She thought for approximately 1 second. "Compromised how?" "I'll explain in person. Voss, 20 minutes. The line went dead. She was out the door in 4. The boots were by the door, where they always were. She laced them in the elevator going down, pulling the knot tight the way she had done 10,000 times before. The Meridian Hotel sat at the end of a one-way street feeding into a larger avenue. The kind of boutique establishment the Presidential Protection Detail liked for its discreet service entrance. Its single interior stairwell with no camera coverage between floors 3 and 7, and its reliable owner, a retired naval officer who had been running low-profile dignitary accommodations for 12 years without a single confirmed leak. Until tonight. Mara arrived at the staging van to find 6 people she recognized and 3 she didn't. The 3 were wearing plain clothes, but held themselves with the particular disciplined stillness of people trained to move fast when required. She clocked their positions, their sight lines, the way the shortest kept the exit in his peripheral vision at all times without appearing to look at it. "Good," said the deputy director when he saw her. He was a tall, gray man named Caldwell, who had been in the intelligence community long enough that his face had settled into a permanent expression of measured skepticism. It was not unfriendly. It was the face of a man who had spent 40 years receiving information of variable quality and had developed appropriate filters. Here's what we know. What they knew was this. The 3-person advance team that had swept the 7th floor at 1800 hours had been intercepted at approximately 2200. Not killed, sedated, professionally and efficiently. With a compound that suggested medical training and patience, and moved to a laundry room on the 4th floor where housekeeping would have discovered them by morning at the latest. The intercept pointed to advanced schedule access, a document shared among fewer than 11 people, all of whom were currently accounted for and being separately and simultaneously questioned in a process that was not Mara's concern. The president was in Suite 714. He had 2 agents with him, both now unreachable via standard communications. The backup comm channel, the one that Mara herself had helped design 8 years ago, during a security architecture review that she had since repeatedly attempted to have removed from her permanent record for entirely different reasons, was still active but silent. It was designed to be initiated from inside the suite, Mara said. "Yes," Caldwell said, "and nobody inside the suite is initiating it." "No." She studied the floor plan spread across the folding table. 7th floor, service stairwell. The linen corridor that ran parallel to the main hall, accessible via a door that would read, to anyone who didn't know, as a standard utility closet. "I know that floor," she said. "I did the advanced site assessment 14 months ago. I wrote the security report." "We know. That's why you're here." The linen corridor has a pressure plate alarm installed at the far end. Commercial model, weight sensor array, standard hospitality security installation. I documented it in the site report. We know. Do you have the current bypass code? A pause that told her everything. The code was rotated last month as part of the quarterly security update. We don't have the current sequence. Mara looked up from the floor plan. 12 faces looked back at her in the dim light of the staging van. She was aware, with the peripheral self-consciousness that 19 years of fieldwork had not entirely eradicated, that she was wearing her kitchen jacket, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and her old boots. She was also aware, far more prominently, that none of that mattered. "I can get around the plate," she said. "I need 2 minutes alone in the stairwell, and I need continuous monitoring on the backup channel. If he's conscious and active, I want to know the moment anything changes." Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that was not skepticism exactly, but was making a decision about the distance between confidence and recklessness, and which side of the line someone was standing on. "You'll go in solo?" "If I go in with backup, we risk the corridor." The plate registers cumulative weight variation across the sensor array. 2 people in standard issue footwear creates a detection signature. 1 person, she paused briefly, then continued, in the right boots, can clear it without triggering. Nobody laughed at the boots. Nobody made any sound at all. 3. The service stairwell smelled of industrial cleaner and old carpet glue and the particular variety of darkness that exists only in places designed never to be seen. Mara moved up it the way she had moved through 100 stairwells in 100 buildings on 4 continents over the course of a career she had never quite planned and had never been able to imagine doing differently. Close to the wall. Weight distributed across the full sole with each step. Heel never striking first, toes taking the load, the transfer smooth and quiet. It was the kind of movement that took years to become natural, and a single careless moment to forget. She had not forgotten. She climbed, thinking about the layout. The linen corridor began at a staff access door on the south end of the 7th floor and ran 31 feet to a second door that opened into the main hall between rooms 709 and 711. Suite 714 was 12 steps past the exit. Turn right, 6 more steps. The pressure plate was at foot 22 of the corridor, approximately 1 meter wide, running wall to wall, positioned such that a person walking at any normal stride length would place their leading foot directly on it. Mara had written that assessment herself. It was in the site security report. It had apparently not been forwarded to whoever handled the quarterly bypass code rotation, which was an administrative gap that someone would need to address in a memo that she was already composing in the back of her mind and intended to submit with a very particular tone. She did not allow herself to dwell on it. Annoyance was a luxury. She did not have a luxury budget tonight. She reached the 7th floor door and eased it open with the flat of her palm, feeling the air pressure equalize, listening to the corridor beyond. Dim amber nighttime lighting. No movement. The housekeeping cart that sometimes occupied the elevator alcove was absent. The hall smelled of the previous evening's room service and fresh linen. Normal sounds. Normal air. The staff-only door was 10 feet to her left. She moved to it, pressed her ear flat against the painted steel, and waited. 30 seconds. An actual 30 seconds. Not the 18 that most people produced when they thought they were counting 30. Nothing on the other side. She opened the door. The linen corridor was narrower than the floor plan had suggested, the way enclosed spaces always are when you occupy them with your body rather than a schematic. Shelving units on both sides, stacked dense with folded linens, bath towels, pillowcases in sealed plastic. A fluorescent strip light, half dimmed, humming at a frequency she felt behind her teeth. The smell of starch and fabric softener and institutional cleanliness. At foot 22, the plate. She could see the edge of it if she knew to look for it, a barely perceptible seam in the industrial flooring, where the tile compound transitioned between slightly different shades of gray. The kind of variation you would attribute to a batch inconsistency if you weren't looking for the seam itself. Someone who didn't know would walk straight across it without a second thought. Someone who knew but didn't have the right footwear would have to press flat against the shelving units and inch along the wall, which would work but would be slow and would rattle the bottom shelf, and the bottom shelf held glass votives and ceramic soap dispensers. The boots had a specific mechanical property Mara had discovered entirely by accident during an operation in a city she was not permitted to name. The sole material, a dense non-marking rubber compound, discontinued after 2009, when the supplier was acquired, distributed weight differently than any modern sole she had tested. Softer at the center, firmer at the outer edge, with a profile that combined with the geometry of Mara's gait. Her left ankle canting slightly outward under load, her right hip carrying a fractionally higher strike point from an old injury, produced a pressure signature that fell below the detection threshold of the most common class of commercial hotel security pressure sensors. She had tested this once, formally, in a controlled environment. It was not something she had ever included in any report, partly because the operational implications were narrow, and partly because putting it in a report would require explaining how she had discovered it. And that story was longer than any debrief she had wanted to sit through. She had put it in her feet instead, in her legs and her ankles, and the specific way her body knew how to move when the ground required particular care. She walked across the plate. Nothing triggered. She exhaled once, through her nose, quiet as a held breath released at the end of a long day, and kept moving. Suite 714 had a secondary service access. She had noted not from the floor plan, but from memory, from having stood in the adjacent utility corridor 3 years ago during an advance for a different principal, and having tried every door out of the kind of professional habit that had become, over time, indistinguishable from instinct. One of those doors had opened into a service pantry. She had noted it. She had not put it in the report for that advance because it was not germane to that principal's security profile. She had kept it in her head, filed under the category of things that might matter someday. Someday was tonight. She found the utility corridor, found the door, confirmed it was unlocked, and entered the pantry. Dark, close, the smell of warming tray elements and coffee grounds, and the ghost of someone's room service club sandwich. She listened at the interior suite door for 30 full seconds. 2 voices, low, close together, neither of them familiar. She keyed her earpiece once, the agreed signal for in position. A single click came back. Received. She opened the pantry door. The 2 agents were on the floor with their backs against the wall near the bedroom entrance, wrists secured with what appeared to be their own restraint equipment, which Mara filed under things to address later in a tone that would be empathetic but unambiguous. Both were conscious. Both were watching her with the particular expression of trained professionals in acute physical discomfort who had made a prior decision not to let that show. She assessed the suite in 3 seconds. Dimensions, sight lines, furniture placement, the window status, the door to the bedroom, the position of the one or other figure in the room. He was at the writing desk near the window, still in the jacket and tie from the dinner that had been the official reason for his presence in this city. 61 years old, silver-haired, the posture of a man who had spent 3 decades being advised to sit straight by people with various kinds of authority over him, and had at some point simply internalized the advice. His eyes found her and moved through a sequence she recognized and had seen before, in contained spaces under difficult circumstances. Alarm, then assessment, then the particular recalibration of recognition, then, finally, something that looked like relief settling carefully into place. He had met her once, 2 years ago, for approximately 12 minutes in a pre-travel security briefing in a conference room that smelled of the previous meeting's lunch. She had not expected him to remember her face. "Agent Voss," he said, steadier than she had anticipated. "Mr. President." She went to the agent's first, assessment, vitals, field tool from her jacket pocket, working on the restraints while she talked. "Are you injured?" "No. They didn't touch me. I don't think I was the primary objective." "You weren't. This room was. You were a complication to be managed around." He absorbed this. "Flattering. A beat. How did you get in here?" "Carefully." She got the first restraint free. Richards rolled his wrists and gave her a tight nod. She moved to the second agent. "The corridor," the president said. "The pressure alarm. I read the security report from last year's advance. Your report. The bypass code wasn't available to you." She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she was having difficulty categorizing precisely. Something between intellectual curiosity and the older, quieter thing that lives underneath it. "I didn't need the bypass code," she said. A silence. His eyes moved downward, briefly and deliberately, toward her feet, then back up. "The boots," he said. "The boots," she confirmed. For a moment, in Suite 714 of the Meridian Hotel, the President of the United States looked at Mara Voss's worn, creased, slightly lopsided, definitively unfashionable field boots and said nothing at all. Then he did something she had not anticipated from a man in his position, in this room, at this hour. He laughed, not loudly, not with the practiced warmth he deployed in rooms with cameras. A short, genuine, surprised laugh. The kind that comes when something cuts cleanly through fear and lands exactly where it is supposed to. "Outstanding," he said quietly. "Absolutely outstanding." She freed the second restraint, stood, and began the extraction sequence. There was a great deal still to do. She was, as always, already doing it. Furch. The debrief took the rest of the night and a significant portion of the following day. There were formal statements, preliminary incident reports, a security architecture review that would eventually run to 87 pages, and a separate conversation with Caldwell that lasted 90 minutes in a conference room with bad coffee and no windows. The conversation covered, among other things, why certain operational capabilities, specifically the acoustic and mechanical properties of certain non-standard issue footwear, had not been formally documented in any asset disclosure. Mara's position was that she had never been asked to inventory her feet. Caldwell's position was that this was technically accurate and philosophically troubling. They agreed to disagree, which had been the outcome of approximately 40% of their professional disagreements over the past decade, and which both of them had come to regard as a reasonable resolution. Richard sent her a text message at 2 in the afternoon that said only, "Buy you a coffee sometime." She replied, "Sure." She knew they would never actually organize it. That was all right. Some gratitude lives most honestly in the gesture. The investigation into how the advance schedule had been compromised was not her case. She read the interim summary in 6 minutes, noted 2 things she would have followed up differently, and filed it under someone else's jurisdiction. By 3:15, she was home. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that was actually hot this time, and she took the boots off and set them side by side on the floor in front of her chair, and looked at them for a while in the winter afternoon light. The left heel was more worn than it had been yesterday. The crease at the right toe had deepened slightly from the specific way she had distributed her weight on the pressure plate, she thought. The particular forward lean she had maintained for those 2 steps. The laces had held, but they needed replacing. She had been thinking that for the better part of a year. She should probably get new laces. She drank her tea. She looked at the boots. The boots said nothing, which was one of the things she had always appreciated about them. The dinner was a month later. Another function, another hotel ballroom, another table arranged with a precision that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with hierarchy. Another set of people whose names she logged and set aside. Pierce was there, telling a story about a golf trip to Hilton Head. The congressional aide was there in new heels, laughing at something that a man in a blue tie was saying. Delgado caught Mara's eye across the room and gave her a small, neutral nod of the kind that meant, I know something happened, and I know I don't know exactly what, and I know better than to ask. She nodded back. Mara arrived at 7:10, checked the room, identified 4 exits and 2 blind spots, confirmed the security team placement, and took her assigned seat. She accepted the breadbasket. She waited for the deputy director's briefing notes, which arrived via encrypted message at 7:23. She was wearing the boots. Jules, across the table, caught her eye and raised a glass without comment. The particular quality of Jules's expression said, I know you did something this past month, and I know you'll tell me eventually. And I'm not asking tonight, because tonight you look like someone who wants to eat dinner. Jules was usually right about these things. Mara raised her glass back. She ate her dinner. She delivered her notes to the deputy director at 9:45. She was home before 11. Nobody said anything about the boots. Nobody who had ever mattered had. Epilogue. 2 weeks after the incident at the Meridian, a handwritten note arrived at Mara's office. It came through the standard mail intake, screened and cleared, and was placed on her desk with a daily reading folder by her assistant, who had noted only that it bore no return address and appeared to have been written with a fountain pen. It was on plain cream paper. No official letterhead, no seal. The handwriting was deliberate and careful. The handwriting of someone who had been taught that letters were worth the time it took to form them properly. It said, Agent Voss, I understand there was some commentary at a dinner some months ago regarding your choice of footwear. I want you to know that I read security reports, all of them, consistently, which I recognize is considered unusual in my position. I read yours from 14 months ago. I read the site assessment and the corridor documentation and the sensor specifications. I know, therefore, exactly what it took to walk through that corridor the way you walked through it, and what those boots meant to be able to do that. I am not a man who finds it easy to be in debt to anyone. I find I am in debt to you, and to a pair of boots that, I am told, were purchased sometime in the early part of this century, and have declined every retirement offer extended to them since. I hope you'll keep them for a good while longer. With gratitude and considerable respect, R.H. Mara read the note once. She sat with it for a moment in the way she sat with things that required a certain quality of attention. Then she folded it in half and in quarters and placed it in the inner breast pocket of her jacket, next to the field tools she had used on Richard's wrists and which she had not yet returned to inventory. She thought she might keep both for a while. She wore the jacket home that evening through the cold and the early dark of the February street, the city doing what cities do, moving, indifferent, full of its own concerns. She walked the 4 blocks from the parking garage the way she had walked 1,000 streets in 100 cities. Close to the wall, quiet, present, watching. She was wearing the boots. She was always wearing the boots. And somewhere, in a file that would remain classified for the next 25 years, in a section marked simply Meridian, Asset Protection Successful, in a footnote that 14 people would ever read, there was a single line that said, "Extraction achieved via non-standard approach. Recommend no further documentation of methodology. Asset. Voss, M. Equipment. Personal." The footnote did not mention the boots by name. It didn't have to. End